Hi, my name is Angela Ian. I would like to welcome you to this webinar where we are going to talk about small group structures and routines. I'm excited to have you here today, but first I just want to introduce myself. I am an instructional coach with a literacy focus in Connecticut. I am extremely passionate about literacy and advocating for what's best for students. I am a firm believer that everything that we do as educators should be grounded in data, and our students' needs and interests should be at the center of every single thing that we do. My why. Several years ago, I was working in a school district virtually during COVID, and I had several students who were receiving special education services, and I was told that those students couldn't do certain things. They wouldn't be able to read, they wouldn't be able to learn their letters and sounds, and that was very frustrating as an educator because I knew that with the right support and the right services and the right resources, I would be able to support these students. And that's exactly what I did. The program that we were using at the time, I realized was not working, and I knew I had to do something. And so during that time, I created a program. I kind of really dove into the research and started creating resources and materials that would help my students. And by the end of that year, those students who were told that they wouldn't be able to do specific things in regards to literacy, they had achieved those skills and so much more. And so I am here today to share some research with you, share strategies and routines that I have seen, I have used with hundreds of students, and I've seen these structures and routines lead to success in the classroom. So I hope that you find this helpful. If you have any questions after this webinar, feel free to send me an email. I would love to chat with you. I will be giving you all the information at the end of the webinar. Let's get started. There are 3 parts to this webinar. The first part is going to be just talking about the research. And the learning target is I can explain key principles of the science of reading and their implications for effective literacy instruction. Part 2 is where we're going to really talk about those structures and routines. And then the learning target for that is I can describe and implement essential structures and routines for effective small group reading instruction. And then part 3 is in less than 10 minutes, we are going to create a lesson together. And we are going to create a detailed evidence-based small group reading lesson that incorporates science of reading principles and effective instructional routines. As you look at this group of students here, I want you to just take 10 seconds and think about the students in your classroom. You have about 30% of students who are going to learn how to read regardless of the instruction that you provide them. When I think of this group of students, I think of my own daughter. My own daughter falls into this category where she just naturally learned to read very quickly. You have 15% of your students who are going to require additional time and support to get back on track for Tier 1 instruction. You have 50% of your students who are going to be able to read with high quality Tier 1 instruction and foundational skills. And these students are going to learn to read with explicit and direct instruction and foundational skills. And then you have 5% that struggle with severe cognitive impairments. Now, thinking about that, the key takeaway that I want you to have is that explicit, systematic instruction is going to meet the needs of all of your learners. Research states that 95% of your students' needs will be met with explicit and systematic instruction, but I am a firm believer that you will be able to move all of your students towards their benchmark goals if you incorporate this type of instruction into your classroom. If you do not have the teacher knowledge, or if you are in a district that's really focused on balanced literacy, those students are at a disadvantage because with that type of instruction, you're really only going to reach about 45% of your students. And so that's why today it's really important that we think about the research, we implement best practices in our classrooms and that we really use our data to move our students. And data is going to play a key role in making sure that the instruction that we provide is really targeted and personalized. And we'll go a little more into that in a little bit. What is the science of reading? The science of reading is an extensive interdisciplinary body of research that provides evidence-based insights into how reading and writing skills develop, why some individuals struggle with these skills, and how effective teaching methods can improve literacy outcomes. This research is not new. It has been conducted over the past 50 years across various languages and cultures, integrating findings from fields such as cognitive psychology, neuroscience, education, and linguistics. There are some key components of the science of reading, and they include phonemic awareness, which is the ability to identify and manipulate individual sounds and words. Phonics, understanding the relationship between phonemes, the sounds, and graphemes, the letters. Fluency, the ability to read text accurately, quickly, and with proper expression. Vocabulary, knowing the meaning of words and how to use them effectively. And comprehension, the ability to understand and interpret what is read. The science of reading emphasizes systematic, explicit instruction in these areas to support all learners. Every single learner in your class. That means I'm referring to your students who have an IEP. I am referring to your students who have a 504 plan. I'm referring to your students who may be in an autism classroom. I am referring to every single one of your students will benefit from explicit and systematic instruction. It is not a single program. It is not a method. It's a comprehensive approach that informs best practices in literacy instruction. Reading and writing are not natural. They are not natural processes for humans because they require explicit instruction and a conscious effort to learn, unlike spoken language, which is acquired naturally through exposure. And here are some key reasons why reading and writing are not innate. Goes back to our brain structure. The human brain is hardwired for speech with specific areas dedicated to processing spoken language. However, there's no specific reading lobe in the brain. Reading requires the integration of several brain processes that are not inherently connected, such as recognizing visual symbols and associating them with sounds and meanings. Complexity of decoding. Learning to read involves decoding written symbols into sounds, understanding the alphabetic principle, and applying these skills rapidly and fluently. This process is complex because it requires conscious recognition of phonemes, the smallest units of sound, and their corresponding letters or letter patterns, which vary across languages. Reading and writing systems are cultural inventions that have developed over time. Many cultures relied solely on oral traditions without written systems, demonstrating that literacy is not a natural human trait. Unlike speaking, which children learn through immersion in language-rich environments, reading requires direct instruction in phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary development, and comprehension. This instruction is necessary for all learners. One thing that is really cool when you think about the brain structure is that with explicit and systematic instruction, you can rewire a student's brain. You can rewire an adult's brain with the right type of instruction. It just may take more frequency, more practice. Students may need, increased dosage. They may need, the pacing may need to be adjusted for certain students, but this type of instruction works for everybody. When we talk about the brain, we think about the four-part processing system, and it's a framework that explains how the brain processes written language to facilitate reading. This model involves four interconnected processors. Let's start with phonological. Phonological is the ability to it's your ability to hear sounds, to produce sounds, and to interpret sounds. So when we think of phonological, we think of auditory. When we think of orthographic, we think of it as your brain's filing cabinet or your brain's filing system. It is your ability to store and quickly retrieve words when you are reading. Let's think of a phone number. If you were raised anytime before like the 2010s, you probably had to memorize a lot of phone numbers. I know I personally did. And the orthographic processing system, when you think of it in terms of remembering a phone number, is that eventually, once you learn that number, you quickly can recall it. And you can quickly dial whosever number you needed to call because you've already mapped that number in your brain. And so you can quickly retrieve that number when you need to dial it. So that's an example of the orthographic processing system. Then we think of meaning. It's also known as the semantic processing system, and it's our ability to understand words and sentences. Comprehension does not begin when your student enters third grade or fourth grade or fifth grade. Comprehension begins at the word level. And it's really getting our students to think about the words, think about their meanings. And then from there, we build up to sentences and then to paragraphs and to stories. The context processor really works with that meaning processor because they work together. The context processor is where we have to use clues from the text to figure out the meanings of words, or we have to interpret the text and think about the surrounding words or clues to help us figure out the meaning. These processors all work together. And all of these processes are important because when we are thinking about the activities that we're going to be doing in a little bit, the biggest bang for your buck is to choose activities that incorporate all four of these processors. Let's see how these processors all work together. So the first one is the phonological processor. So I want you to think about the word hi. How many sounds are in the word hi? So for that, I would say hi, I'm going to segment the sounds. I. So there are two sounds in the word hi. Now, for your orthographic processor, now I want you to write the word hi. So for this, we would have to segment the sounds. I have to know that the letter H says and then I have to know that the letter I says I. That's if I'm referring to the greeting. Now the meaning processor is where we have to think about, what does this word mean to us? Well, the word hi has a couple of different meanings. The word hi can be referred to a greeting. It could be referred to, a student may say, oh, it's something that I say to my friends. The word hi could be referring to how high something is, how tall something is. It could be referring to height. So now this is where it gets a little tricky because I'm not sure which hi they're referring to. However, the context processor is what's going to help me figure out which hi we're referring to. So let's take a look. The girl waved blank to her best friend. Here's where I have to use those context clues and I have to figure out which hi I'm referring to. Well, I know wave, when I'm greeting someone, I usually wave to them. I know that when I usually see a friend, I usually wave to a friend. So now the context processor is helping me and helping me realize that I'm referring to hi, the HI, the greeting. So that's how all these processors work together in an activity. And here's a little example to show you which hi I was referring to. When we think of it in terms of reading a book, our orthographic processor, it's what's helping us to instantly recognize the words. We don't have to decode every word because we've already mapped them. It's very different than thinking of just sight words, where it's that memory where we're using our flashcards to remember words. The orthographic processor is that we've learned our letters, we've learned our sounds, we've mapped patterns within words, and now we've put all of those parts together to read the word instantly. The phonological processor is what helps you to sound out those words that you don't know. The meaning processor is what helps you to understand the words and the sentences. And that context processor is what we use to help us use clues from the rest of the text so that we can fully grasp the meaning of words that we may be unfamiliar with. So all of those processors are working together when we are reading. Let's think about Scarborough's reading rope. When we think of the science of reading, this is definitely one of those graphics that you're going to see and hear a lot about. We have our language comprehension strand up top, and then we have our word recognition strand at the bottom. Right now, there's a huge emphasis on the word recognition strand. A lot of programs are really pushing those foundational skills and talking about the importance of phonics instruction. And it's extremely important. However, there are ways that we can integrate the language comprehension components into our lessons so that we can really provide a detailed lesson to our students and really incorporate both components, because the language comprehension strand and word recognition strand really work together. And it really just comes down to the wording and the structures and the routines that you put into place. And we're going to get into that today. When we think of word recognition, we think of our phonological awareness. We think of decoding, being able to read words, alphabetical principle, being able to recognize patterns within words, using strategies to read, and then sight recognition. That's that orthographic mapping that you've heard already, where we are mapping the words based on how they sound, based on their patterns, based on that phoneme-grapheme relationship. We are not using flashcards to learn these words. We are learning the structure of words. And then we have our language comprehension strand. That's our background knowledge. That is our vocabulary, our language structure. That is our verbal reasoning skills, our literacy knowledge. Those are all parts of the upper strand of the rope. Let's talk about assessments, because everything that we do needs to be aligned and grounded in data. So we have two types of assessments. We have norm referenced assessments, which is where we compare a student's performance to that of a defined group of peers, the norm group. Typically, these scores are reported as percentiles, showing how a student ranks compared to others. These type of tests do not measure absolute knowledge or skills, but rather a relative standing. So if you think of your SATs tests, if you think of your state tests, if you think of maybe your school district uses STAR reading assessments, those would all be part of norm reference assessments. And then we have criterion reference assessments. These assessments measure a student's performance against a fixed set of predetermined criteria or learning standards. Scores are often reported as a percentage of correct answers or level of mastery. They evaluate whether a student has learned a specific knowledge or skills. Commonly used to assess proficiency in specific subject areas or skills. Some examples of criterion reference assessments are the DIBELS, the Gallisto-Ellis test of coding skills, QRI, phonological awareness literacy screenings. Criterion reference assessments are often used for progress monitoring, to help you really target your instruction and make sure it's personalized for your students. The reason why we want to think about the different types of assessments are because we want to make sure that we have that data-driven approach. Everything we do should be grounded in data. And we want to make sure we have a really clear understanding of where our students fall in that literacy continuum. So prior to implementing small groups, you want to make sure that you have enough information on your students to really target their instruction. So I highly suggest administering a diagnostic assessment. And that's an in-depth evaluation that's used to identify a student's specific strengths, weaknesses, knowledge, and skills before instruction begins. It helps you to really identify an instructional focus. And it will also tell you, where your student falls in that continuum, and then any, potential challenges that they have in specific skills. I'm a big fan of core phonics. It's fairly quick to administer, and it really helps you to see where your students fall in the continuum. But then there's other tests as well that you can administer. Progress monitoring is extremely important. Progress monitoring should be done for any student that is reading below grade level. It should ideally be done every 2 weeks. I'm actually participating My school's participating in some data-based intervention research through UConn, and they actually have us progress monitoring students once a week. So any of our students that are part of that research are progress monitored weekly on their targeted skills. So I know that can be overwhelming if you don't have enough support, but if you have a student that's really struggling, you may want to test them more frequently. Then you have your universal assessments, your screening tools that are used to evaluate all students in the classroom or school to identify overall learning needs. Think of your benchmark assessments. In my school district, we actually do use DIBELS for our benchmarks assessments, and then we also use them for progress monitoring. And then your summative assessments, those are your state tests. If you think of your state tests as, everything you're doing in the classroom is acting as your through line to get your students to be successful on the state tests at the end of the year. We want to make sure we're using data to guide our instruction. We have to analyze our data. We have to identify an instructional focus. And today I'm going to talk about a couple of different levels. Your student's going to fall within the phonological awareness and letter naming, letter sounds range. And ideally that would be kindergarten if you think about those students coming in, but any of our students could be in this level if they're reading below grade level. We have phonological awareness and CVC patterns, which would typically be Tier 1 instruction for students in first grade. Phonological awareness and beyond CVC patterns would typically be Tier 1 instruction for students in grade 2. Phonological awareness and long vowel patterns would be technically grade 3 students. If it was Tier 1 instruction, multisyllabic word reading would be grade 4, and advanced phonics would be grade 5. Now remember, small group instruction or intervention groups need to be targeted. That means you may have some fifth graders who are working at the CVC level, and that's okay. We need to make sure it's targeted and it's aligned to those students and their learning needs. So explicit systematic instruction, you've heard me talk about it before, it's crucial. It's characterized by clear, structured, and sequenced teaching methods. Direct instruction is explicit. That means you're clearly explaining the learning objectives and the steps needed to achieve them. You are showing your students what you want them to be able to do. You are modeling strategies for them, and you're demonstrating the skill or the concept. The guided practice is where your students are practicing the new skill with your support, and they're receiving immediate feedback to correct errors and reinforce their learning. And then independent practice, that's where your students are really applying the skills independently and solidifying their understanding and mastery. That's very important in your small groups and in your intervention groups. Your students should be reading words independently. They should be reading sentences independently, decodable passages independently, because that's where you're holding them accountable to make sure they're using the strategies that you've been talking about. And then sequence instruction. This is huge because you need to make sure that your lessons are carefully planned to build on prior knowledge, moving from simple to more complex tasks. This is going to make your life easier. Once you understand that literacy continuum, you're going to be able to do anything in the classroom, and it's going to feel effortless, but it's going to be very targeted and meaningful instruction. So let's take a look right here. As I talked about, we want to use our data to make sure we're really guiding our instruction. So if I look at this student right here, this is a student who is in grade 5. However, this student is reading below grade level. So I have a couple of different assessments here. I use the core phonics on this student, and then I also use the PAST for phonological awareness skills. So the PAST showed me that this student needs support with some advanced phonemic awareness skills. He is able to segment the sounds in words. And then when it came time to do the core phonics for the word reading portion, for the core phonics, 14 out of 15 is considered passing a level. So since he is in 5th grade, I decided to start at the long vowel level. He had about 13 out of 15 for 2 parts, and then 14 out of 15 for 1 part. And then for the blends, he had a little bit more trouble. So I'm starting with long vowels with this student. But I need to make sure that I have review and practice embedded every single day to make sure we're working on some of those patterns that he's still struggling with. So this is how I would look at the diagnostic assessments. I would look at my past, figure out where they are in that phonological awareness continuum, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, look at the core phonics, use this data along with the benchmark data and any other assessments that I may have, and look for trends. What do I notice? I know this student and I know that he really struggles with VCE patterns. And that's where he really fell apart on this assessment and the Ellis assessment that I also administered to him. And so that's how I would identify my instructional focus. All right, let's get to part two, where we actually think about and talk about and see these structures and routines and what they look like during small group instruction. There are a couple different steps that we're going through. The first one's going to be sound fluency and sound dictation. Then we have phonological awareness. We have our introduction of our new concept, word fluency, word dictation, pre-teaching high frequency words that are in the decodable passage. We have our content passage for students at the beyond or above level, and then we have our sentence dictation. These are the components that are going to be in every single unit, in every single lesson. This structure is really important because you want to make sure that you are, not overloading your students with information. You want to make sure that all of the structures and routines that they're doing every single day are consistent. They're similar. The only new thing that's going to be introduced to them is a new pattern or a new syllable type. And once they become familiar with the routines and the structures, the lessons are going to flow. And like I said, you're not going to overload them. And this type of instruction will support their working memory and really help them to transfer information from their short-term to their long-term memory. So let's get started. First, you want to state your goal and your purpose of your lesson. What are you doing today with your students? Well, today we're going to manipulate phonemes to create new words, and we're going to read and write closed syllable words with a short E vowel sound. Simple, quick. You're telling them what they're going to do so that they know that everything they're doing in that lesson has a purpose. You want all of the activities to make sense for them and for them to understand why they are doing what they are doing. There's a reason for it. We are doing these activities to help them read independently. For the first activity, it's where we do sound review and sound fluency. This is really important because repetition is crucial for developing automaticity in reading. It supports memory retention and fluency. Students need to be fluent at the sound level in order for them to be fluent at the word level, in order for them to be fluent at the sentence level and the passage level. Fluency begins with sounds. And for this activity, you are going to review previously taught sounds on a regular basis. And then here's just some information on how those processors work for this specific activity. So for this activity, I would first model, and I would show my students how I'm going to say the sounds fluently. And I like to say, my turn. K, d, a, b, e, j, k, m, I, a. Your turn. And then I would have my students do together, and I would say, sound, f, sound, 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 and I would go through and have us do it together. Now I'm going to call on students for individual turns. I would say, Susie, and then I would have her go through. Sound, 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 s, and they would go through and say the sounds. You want can be really strategic here. You want to go back and think about the assessments that you gave your student. So if I look at my fifth grade student right here, I know that he has some confusion with N's and H's based off of his assessment. So I may add in and be strategic about the letters that I'm having them practice for sound fluency and really make sure that that student's focusing on the sounds that they're confusing on the assessments. Sound dictation is very similar. You're thinking about your data. You're thinking about the sounds or the letters that your students confusing in their writing or when they're reading. And those are the letters that you want to say the sound, and you want your students now to write the letter. So they're listening to a sound and they're writing the corresponding letter. Sound dictation helps students to establish that connection between the phonemes and the graphemes, which is essential for spelling and reading. Once again, here's an explanation of how the different processes are working for this activity. So here's where I would say B. And I would expect that my students would say, would write the letter that says B. I encourage my students to write both uppercase and lowercase letters. And then I noticed that Bobby is confusing this E's in his eyes when I administer the Dibbles assessment. So I'm going to make sure that I include those letters for this sound dictation. And I'm going to include them every single day until Bobby masters those sounds. Let's say a student makes a mistake. Then you can say, my turn. The letter is E, the sound is E. You would show them, you would explicitly tell them, say the sound, show them the letter, and then have them write it again. You always want to make sure you're providing that immediate feedback. The onset refers to the initial consonant or consonant blend, and then the rhyme refers to the vowel sounds and the consonants that come after that vowel sound. When your students are blending onset and rhyme, you want them to hear that initial sound, the onset, and then you want them to hear the rhyme at. And you want them to be able to put those sounds together to make the word hat. This can be a little tricky for students who are really struggling with their phonological awareness skills. So for this activity, I like to incorporate pictures for some visual clues to help them out. So for this activity, I would put a book in front of my students and I would say, play a little I Spy. I spy a at. And I would show them the page and I would keep repeating that at and have them repeat. And if they have a difficult time finding the hat, I would give them another clue. And I would say, he wears a at on his head. And then I would see if they could figure it out from that clue. If they're really struggling, then you can have them blend the body coda, which means that you're going to combine that initial consonant with your vowel sound first. And so I would say, I spy a hat. And then that many students are usually successful with blending the body coda. And you want to give them opportunities to blend the body coda so they can feel successful with this skill, but then you also want to make sure you're supporting them and providing them opportunities to hear that onset rhyme, because that separation of those sounds is really going to help get them and prepare them for that phoneme level, which is where we want all of our students to be. For segmenting onset rhyme, you would be able to say the word can. And you want your students to be able to pull out that initial sound, that first sound. So I would say can. What's the first sound you hear in can? What's the first sound in can? And then really overemphasize that first sound. And then say the first sound is k, and the rest of the word is an. Can. Now, the word level, the syllable level, the onset rhyme level, those are all your scaffolds to get your students to the phoneme level. And that's why once they're at the phoneme level, you do not need to worry about the activities prior to that level. At the phoneme level, you want them to be able to blend. You want them to be able to hear sounds and put them together. App. And you want them to be able to slide those together and say nap. Well, guess what? That can be a little bit tricky, especially if you have kindergartners. So for this one, you could do a visual. I like to use my arm, and I would say nap. And then you could have them slide those sounds together. Nap. Once again, if they're struggling with that nap, then you can do that body coda. Nap. For this activity, I found that students enjoy when you can kind of incorporate your pictures and your visuals or play a game of I Spy. So if you were in the classroom, you might say, I spy a book. And then see who can get it. Can anyone get it? And if they get it right, okay, you're out. You've got it. And then if you have students that are struggling, you can say, I spy a book. And see if they're able to do it with the body coda. So that's a little way to make it a little more fun and engaging. I say get it right and you're out, because that helps you to see who still needs help, and then but you're giving them individual turns, but they're all actively engaged because they think they're playing a fun game. And the same thing for phoneme segmentation. You're going to say a word, and your students are going to be segmenting the sounds in the word. That's where they're pulling out the sounds. So for cat, I may have some chips in front of them. If you have Elkonin boxes, they can draw circles for each sound, or they can move a chip for each sound. And for this activity, you would say cat, and then you want your students to ideally say k, at. However, this is a difficult skill, so you're going to need to probably scaffold if your students are not at this level yet. And that's where you over enunciate whichever sound you want your students to hear. So cat. Let's listen for our first sound. At. What's this first sound? Really over enunciate each of the sounds as your students pull them out, but then always make sure they're saying the sounds in order before you go on to your next word. So you want them to say k, at. But your job is to help them pull it out, having them say it like a robot, really slowly. It's helpful for them to pull it out. But once again, you can do the guess the word right and say all the sounds right, and you're out. So you can really pull apart and see who needs more support with specific skills. At the advanced phonemic awareness level, your students are going to be adding, deleting, and substituting phonemes. These skills progress from simple to complex. So phoneme addition, final addition, create a blend, and then second phoneme is the hardest addition skill. For deletion, initial phoneme deletion is the easiest skill. Second phoneme from a blend is the hardest skill. It's actually very difficult for many students to be able to delete the second phoneme from a blend. So that would be great without and you want them to say gate. For this, you want to provide a visual. So if you have Elkonin boxes, showing them the different Elkonin boxes so they can segment the sounds and then identify the sound that's changing. You can also use finger gestures, tapping, as another strategy as well. And then you have your substitution. Rhyme substitution is the easiest skill. Then you have your initial substitution, your final substitution, and then your vowel substitution. Once again, these skills progress from simple to more complex, and you want to provide visuals for your students. The visuals could simply be your fingers. Elkonin boxes are research-based strategy. You can have, you can cut up a 10 frame or just make boxes on a piece of paper, and, have your students color them in using pocket charts or those sheet protectors actually, and put a paper inside so they can just write right on there with their markers, or you can have a notebook. And so every day they're just turning a page in a notebook and drawing some new boxes. You want to make sure that the phonological awareness skill is really targeted. And so I hope that the progression of each of the skills helps you to see. You do not need to master one skill before you move on to the next. You can incorporate phoneme addition, deletion, and substitution within one lesson using the same word, right? I could say add k to the beginning of an. And then I'd say can without k, and then I can go back to my can, change the k to pan. Super quick. This is not, a very long lesson. You just want to make sure that it's your small group lesson is really structured, and you're quickly progressing through all of these activities. You should be able to hit all of these activities in one lesson. And the more you get comfortable with the structures and the routines, the easier it's going to be. You're introducing your new concept. Explicitly teaching phoneme grapheme correspondences is crucial for effective decoding and spelling. This is where you're telling them the sounds or the patterns they're going to learn. You're showing them what those sounds look like, and then you're supporting them with making those sounds. So for this activity, today we're going to be reading words that have the short E sound. Short E says, eh, watch my mouth. Eh. You can explain what your mouth is doing, explain what your tongue is doing. For a visual, you could say echo and have them cup their ear for echo so that they know that when they do this, they're saying eh. Short E is very challenging for many English language learners. So knowing the sounds that your English language learners may struggle with based off of the sounds and their letters is really important. You want to have a clear understanding of the sounds that are similar in Spanish and English, or which sounds do not exist in Spanish that exist in English, because that's how you're going to really make sure that you are providing that personalized and targeted instruction for those English language learners as well. So here I'm talking about my articulatory gestures. I'm having my students practice the sounds. You can have mirrors for this portion, have them look and see what their mouth is doing. You want them to really feel and understand how they're articulating the sounds and how the sounds can be different. There's a lot of different explanations for the sounds. If you go into my free resources, you have articulatory gesture cards that you can see, and it will touch upon all of the different components of those sounds. But I'm telling my students that we're reading words with the short E sound, like in hen. Give me a thumbs up if you hear the S sound in hen. All right, and then you're going to move on and you are going to model how to decode words with this sound or pattern. We are going to start with the successive blending routine. I'm going to show you some different routines, but the successive blending routine helps students decode words, which is essential for reading fluency. This is really a strategy that you want to use for your students who are just learning to read words. So think kindergarten and first grade. And then we are going to talk about a couple of other different blending strategies. So sound by sound is a common strategy that, I actually started off using this strategy when I first started teaching. However, I've noticed that many students often omit that initial sound when they're doing this. And so the reason for that is because by the time they get to that final sound, they've already forgotten the initial sound. And that goes back to their memory. So we really need to strengthen their memory and to make sure that they're holding onto those sounds. And that's where the successive blending routine is helpful. So I would say sound, sound, blend, ma, sound, mat. So you're having them blend the first two sounds together, add the final sound, and then slide and read the whole word. For once they are consistently reading about 14 CVC words in a minute, so if you think of that Dibbles benchmark for first graders is about 15 for the end of the year, once they can read that many words fluently, they're ready for continuous blending, and that's where they're going to hold on to the sound. So I would say mat. Without stopping, they're connecting all of those sounds. Vowel blending is where they identify the vowels, underline your vowels, connect your vowels with a V for vowel, and then look for those patterns. I would put a C under the D for the vowel consonant E pattern to help them remember that this pattern will make the long vowel sound. And then we have our multisyllabic word routine. That's where we underline our vowels, which is similar to the vowel blending. So we're building off of that previously learned scale, but now we're going to circle our prefix and we're going to box any suffixes that we've learned. So all of these skills build off of one another. We want our students to be able to just read those words, orthographically map them so they can just retrieve them quickly and read them. But we need to teach them routines and strategies and model these strategies every single day. It's not going to take a week or 2 weeks. They need that repetition every single day to master these skills. And then here's an example of a lesson. I will have a couple of words on a whiteboard or a piece of paper for my students. I'm going to model first. And I'm going to say the sound is eh, hen, hen. And then I would say all together, we're going to read some words together. Sound, sound, blend. I draw a scooping motion for the for the first two sounds. 10, 10. Let's see if I can get this to, there we go. So sound, sound, blend, sound, blend, pen, and I'm connecting those sounds. And then I would continue with that guided practice. And now I want my students to be fluent at the word level. So this is where it is important that they're getting that independent practice. I really want to build that automaticity and word recognition. So now I'm going to show my students some words. If you're in kindergarten, you may only show them, 1 to 3 words to start, and then slowly build on and add more words to their word list. In first grade, the benchmark for first grade is 15 words at a minimum. So I usually would show them 15 words. And then so for this one, I would call on a student, Jackie, let's practice reading the words. And I would have them go through a word. And then you ideally want them to read the whole word. But if they can't read the word, you're going to help them with that sound successive blending routine to blend and read those words. When we talk about sight recognition, we really think about just word recognition. We want them to recognize those words by sight. We are not teaching them sight words, or, we're not teaching them to read a list of vocabulary words. We're teaching them patterns so that they can quickly retrieve those words and read them automatically because they know the sounds, because they know the patterns, not because they've memorized the whole word. After word fluency, word dictation. We want our students to write words so that they can really reinforce their spelling and sound letter correspondence. Here's another layer of where we add on those phonemic awareness, those more advanced skills, by creating word chains. And I'll show you an example of that. So my first word is 10. Tell me all the sounds you hear in 10. N. Okay, let's write the word 10. What's the first sound you hear? Write the letter that matches that sound. What is our next sound? Eh. Write the letter that matches that sound. What is our final sound? Write the letter that matches that sound. Now let's add some advanced phonemic awareness skills. 10. Change t to b. What is my new word? Okay, now they have to figure it out. Ben. And they're going to write Ben. Okay, Ben. Change the n to d. What's my new word? Bed. So now they're activating many processors here, right? And so you are getting more practice with those phonemic awareness skills. They are working on their encoding. This is really where you're reinforcing that reading, writing, spelling connection. Spelling does not need to and should not be a separate lesson. If your small group instruction is effective, you're going to incorporate that spelling and reading, and as you're explicitly teaching them patterns and strategies, they are going to be writing those same patterns. And so that daily repetition and practice is going to support them with their writing skills. And after your word writing, you want to focus on that sentence dictation, where you're really going to reinforce their spelling, their grammar. You're going to be thinking about that sentence structure, syntactical awareness. How do we write a sentence that makes sense? So for this, you want to make sure, though, you're including the patterns that you've been working on, that you've been explicitly working on in that lesson for that day. So for this, you want to give them a sentence. I would say, since we're working with short E, the hen is 10. Now, when we think about grammar, we think about syntax of language, sentence structure is incorporated within that. So with this activity, you're including components of that upper strand of the rope, because your students have to think about the words and how they're organized and how they're placed in a specific order in order to make sense and to hold meaning. So here you would tell your students the sentence, the hen is 10. Have them repeat it. The hen is 10. How many words are in your sentence? You want them to be able to identify the number of words in the sentence. You can have your students for this as a scaffold. You can have them make a line for each word. The hen is 10. And now your expectation is that they're going to have a word for each of those lines and have them keep repeating it to themselves. You may have to repeat the sentence over and over a lot until they get comfortable with repeating it on their own. But modeling that process is going to help them do it more and be more independent with that skill. And then so afterwards, you would go over, if there's a heart word like the that they haven't learned yet, you tell them the is a heart word. And it's a heart word because TH says th, and we haven't learned that yet, but you will. And then the E is making the sound, right? So you're explicitly telling them why the letters are making those sounds. And then they would copy that word, and then you would repeat the sentence. At the comprehension starts at the word level, the sentence level. So having them draw a picture to match their sentence would show their comprehension, their understanding of the sentence level. And then we have our decodable text. Decodable texts are really important because they're controlled passages. They're passages that are going to follow particular phonics rules or patterns focused on whatever skills explicitly being taught for that day. It's going to reinforce phonics skills. It's going to build confidence, improve their reading fluency, and support their overall comprehension. When we think of verbal reasoning is part of that upper strand of the rope. And through our questions, we can really focus on verbal reasoning and help our students to deepen their understanding of what they're reading. Hard words are going to be included within your decodable passages. Many heart words are from the Fry and Dolch word lists. Now, I have a resource that has already embedded most of the heart words by their patterns into the specific lessons that are being taught, which means many heart words are actually not so tricky. Once your students have learned the patterns, they can decode those words. So we have flash words, which are the words that your students can decode. They know all of the sounds and the patterns, and they can decode those words. We have temporarily irregular words, which means the students haven't learned a pattern yet, so that's why they're considered irregular, but once they learn the pattern, they will not be irregular. And really, only 4% of irregular words may or may not be partially decodable, which is not a lot. And so that's why if you think of the Dolch and the Fry word list, you can really organize them and teach them based on their patterns. However, to simplify it a little bit here, and to get you, as you get started, you can just think about whatever decodable you're providing to your students. Which words are tricky words? Which words may be tricky? Identify those words. Those are the words you're going to tell them at the beginning. This is the word is. This is a tricky word because the S is making the Z sound. S can sometimes make this sound like in the word is. What is the word? Is. He is a tricky word because you haven't learned that the E can say its name in an open syllable. So, E, what's the word? He. If they have not learned glued sounds yet, can is tricky because the A is nasal. And so you want to make sure you sound it out and you explain to them the tricky part of the word. O would be a tricky word. So I'm going to say the word, sound it out, and explain why it's tricky. Okay? So when you're reading decodables, your expectation is not that your students are going to know the tricky words, but they are going to use their decoding strategies, the words they do know. And most of the words should be decodable in a decodable passage. But we think about, like I said, those high frequency words by thinking about what words in this decodable may be tricky for them. And you explicitly teach them how to read those words. For a decodable, you want to make sure you are modeling what a fluent reader sounds like. You want to read and make sure you're reading with expression. You're paying attention to those punctuation marks. And so with that, you're incorporating fluency, prosody, and then you can have your students echo read after you a sentence. And then you want your students to practice reading sentences. So depending on your students, maybe they're just reading one sentence to start and you want to build off of that and make sure that every week they're progressing and able to read more than just one sentence. And as they're reading, if they are unable to read the whole word, your expectation is that they're sounding out the word. They're using their decoding strategies and you're supporting them with doing that. And you want to make sure you're giving each student a chance to at least read one sentence to start. Here's just another example of a decodable passage. Once you're done reading your decodable passage, our questioning strategies are important and they can be quick. How old is Ben? Ben is 10. Who is Ben? That's a good question, right? And they kind of have to infer, who is Ben? Maybe he's a boy. He's a kid at school. He is, here's where, there is no right or wrong answer. You're just thinking about what they're saying and thinking about what makes sense. He got a hen. Why did he get a hen? Why? We're asking those questions where they have to infer. They have to think about the sentence. They have to think about what's happening. What happened first? What happened next? You're not spending, 10 minutes on these questions. You're thinking about 1 to 2 questions. I would ask maybe one explicit and um, um, one question where that's implicit, where they have to think about the why or the how, because that's really going to support them with their inferencing skills. Here is just an additional decodable text that I added in there. If your students are at the beyond level or above, they should be reading a content passage. They should be reading a passage that is not as controlled, because you want to see if they're applying their skills in a grade level passage. And so before you read a content passage, you want to identify any vocabulary words that are really important for them to understand the topic. So for this, it's on the history of hip hop. So I may pick out records and turntable are 2 words that I would think some of the students may not know those words because they may not like hip hop and they may have never heard those words before. So I'm going to be strategic about the words that I choose to use the vocabulary routine with. And for the vocabulary routine, I'm going to say the word. I can say how many sounds are in the word. I'm going to show them a visual of what that word looks like. Maybe ask them a yes or no question. Have you ever seen a turntable before? Thumbs up if you have, thumbs down if you haven't. Does Taylor Swift have a lot of different records? Thumbs up for yes, thumbs down for no. I'm going to be strategic. I may pick an artist that my students like. I really want them to engage with the passage, so I want to think about my students when I'm coming up with those yes or no questions. And then, what do they know? What do you know about hip hop? What can you tell me about hip hop? And just see, what knowledge do they bring to the table on this specific topic? Are they familiar with hip hop? And that's going to help you as you're reading to make sure that your guiding questions are supporting them with the content. And then as you're reading this passage, I like to time my students 60 seconds, and they're going to read the same passage for several days because you really want to work on building that fluency. It's not a race. Model what a fluent reader looks like. Model reading with prosody, showing them what a good reader looks and sounds like. Have them copy you for a sentence or two, and then give them the opportunity to read. You can have students take turns reading a sentence or a paragraph, or have them each read and you listen in to each student. And then where they're done, have them mark their spot for that day. The next day, have them read, see what spot they get to. And every day they should be reading a little more and more. And if you notice there's words that they're struggling with, you want to go back to those decoding routines and you want to model using those routines for the tricky words in the passage. That's really important. And, the biggest thing is that your instruction is really targeted. It's meaningful, it's planned, it is, you're using that data to guide this instruction. You really want to connect those neural pathways. And the brain, like I said, it can be rewired with the right type of instruction. Thinking about repetitions, your students need a lot of repetitions to solidify those neural pathways. And it's going to vary for your students. But your students who are gifted maybe just need 1 to 4 repetitions. Typical student, 4 to 14 repetitions. Struggling student, 14 to 40. Your students with dyslexia or learning disability need 40 to 200 repetitions. So that means if your student is struggling with a sound or a pattern, they may need to say it 40 to 100 times the right way in order to map it correctly. So that's finding those opportunities on a regular basis to give them a chance to practice those sounds or the patterns. And that's where that sound fluency, that sound dictation, that pattern review, that's why those components are really important. Repetition strengthens those neural pathways necessary for reading, making it more automatic with practice. Consistency and structure are 2 of my favorite words. You want to make sure your structured routines really help to minimize that cognitive overload by providing a predictable framework, which means your students know what's expected of them. They know after word fluency, they're going to practice word dictation. And so that's just really important. So those were all of those key small group structures and routines. Now, there are ways that we can add in some additional comprehension components, but this was kind of just a basic that basic structures and routines that I want you to walk you through, because once you have these routines solidified and you feel comfortable implementing and practice them on a regular basis, then we can add some depth to these structures and routines. So let's plan a lesson. Part 3. In less than 10 minutes, we are going to plan a lesson. So let's take a look at my student here. My student is a grade 2 student who's reading below grade level. Their ORF is 45 words per minute. On their Dibble's nonsense word fluency, words recorded correctly was 11. Their CBC patterns in the core phonics, they fell 14 out of 15, which means they master those CBC skills. Beyond CBC patterns were 9 out of 15, and long vowel was 7 out of 15. So I'm going to start them at the beyond CBC pattern range, just because they really struggled with a lot of those skills. And then if I look a little closer at their Dibble's assessment, there are several sounds and patterns that they do need some review practice with. So just looking at that, I'm now going to go to my chart here, and I'm going to go to the beyond range, and I'm going to start with CH, which would be digraphs. So now for my lesson, I'm going to think, okay, I've administered my diagnostic assessment, identified my instructional focus, which is phonological awareness and beyond CBC patterns. I would create my groups. I would I would deliver the instruction, and then I would progress monitor my students and constantly use that data to guide my instruction. So since we are working with that CH pattern, I noticed on this assessment they confused short E, short I, U, M, and N. So as I'm filling out this form, I am going to say that they need M, N, I, and E for sound fluency and sound dictation. For phonological awareness, on the past assessment, this student struggled with blends. So I'm going to do the addition and deletion and substitution with blends. So that would be an advanced phonemic awareness skills. So let's say bend. I'm going to put an example here. Add ol. It's a little bit tricky with this marker here. Okay. And then for my new concept, it's going to be CH. For guided practice, I'm going to come up with a list of words with that CH pattern. This student's at the beyond level, so you want to try to include at least 15 words, have 15 words in your word list. So here's where you're going to list out all of those words. Guided practice will only be about 2 to 3 words, but for word fluency, you want to put a list of at least 15 words, and you can include those words that were in your guided practice as well. Your word dictation is going to include words that were included with the word fluency. You want to make sure you have words with that same pattern. For your high frequency words, that's where you're going to look at your decodable passages. If you're going to get access in a few seconds to my platform, which has decodable passages for each skill level. And so just to start, remember, from the Dolce and Fry list, you can sort those words into their specific phonics patterns. And with the resource that I'm going to provide to you, you will see many of those words embedded within the lessons based off of their patterns. However, let's pretend you didn't have the list of words or you weren't sure. You would just look at your decodable passage and figure out which words may be tricky for your students. So maybe the word there is in the passage and your students haven't learned that word yet. You would teach them that word. You would tell them the word. They would repeat it. You would highlight the tricky parts of that word, and then you would support them with reading that word within the passage. And then your decodable passage should have words with that CH pattern. Let's pretend you don't have a decodable passage. Well, you know what you can do? You can write a sentence with words with that pattern. So I may say, Chet has a check. Getting a little sloppy over here. It's a little tricky with this marker. And then maybe your students are just reading a sentence for right now until you can get prepared and get the resources that you need that have the specific decodable passages aligned to that skill level. And then you want to have a content passage if they're at the beyond CBC level. What is a content passage? It's a grade level passage. Honestly, all those F&P books that many schools have, use that for a content passage. You're not having them read the whole book, one page, but look at the book before you read it. Have them read the page. What vocabulary do they need to know to understand that content? Highlight one vocabulary word, have them read the passage, model that fluency, and ask those WH questions. Who is it about? What happened? Why did this happen? Where do you think they're going? And then you have your sentence dictation. And that's where you're going to use the words from the lesson and have your students practice writing a sentence on their own. And for that, you would say, maybe I would say, the chick can chop. And I would say the sentence, the chick can chop. How many words are in your sentence? Draw a line and then have them write the sentence. So I think that was less than 10 minutes. Now, for that lesson, once you're done with teaching your lesson, the next day you would go back and you would look at that continuum. So let's take a look quickly. So we're going to go back and we're going to look at that continuum. So I did CH today. Now, tomorrow I'm going to do SH, and my lesson's going to focus on SH. And then that doesn't mean I'm going to forget CH, because now CH, it's a new pattern. It's going to be part of my sound fluency and my sound dictation. Here's where you have to be really strategic and make sure that you are consistently practicing and reviewing the sounds that you've previously taught. Because that's where that repetition comes in, and that's going to help them to master those specific patterns and skills. We don't want to teach and forget. We want to make sure that we are interweaving previously learned skills into our daily lessons, so that we can move our instruction along quicker and be more effective and meaningful in our small group lessons. Once your students, back to those PA skills at the beginning, once your students have mastered, let's say we talked about phoneme addition, deletion, and substitution. Once your students master the phoneme addition, move on to the next skill. And then you continually progress through those skills. You don't hold a student at a skill level for phonological awareness. And once your students master those phonological awareness skills, then you can omit that part of the lesson from your daily practice, and then they'll get that practice with that the word dictation portion of your lessons. And that's our small group structures and routines. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Thank you for taking the time to listen. I hope that you found this information valuable. This is the same structure that I go over with the interns in my school. I always say it's take away the programs, take away the resources. Once you understand the structure and the continuum, you can effectively deliver meaningful instruction, and then you can look at the resources around you and figure out which resources are going to meet your students' needs and be the most effective. So I highly suggest that you incorporate this routine into your daily practice. Reach out to me if you have any questions. You can join a Facebook group that I recently created where I'm going to be sharing some resources, some activities, some ideas, scaffolds to support you in the classroom. I'm also going to give you access to my platform where you will have access to one of the programs, and I'm going to show you what that looks like right now. Once you click the link, you can access the platform, and the promo code webinar 1 will let you choose a level that you would like full access to. And so I am going to just log in here to show you what that looks like. Once you log in, you can select a specific unit. And so within that unit, you are going to get a slide deck that has a full scope and sequence on the decoding patterns. And you get a student workbook that goes along with each of the digital lessons. There are also slides that, there's also a general lesson overview that will help you. If you do not have access to a computer, you can print out the resources and use the general lesson plan to guide your instruction. You also have access to independent work for the specific level that you are choosing to work with on your students, and then you have access to a ton of other resources for each level. And so you can access this information by going to my platform, and then just you're signing up with email access and using the promo code webinar1. Thank you so much for your time today. Please reach out to me, send me an email, and I would love to stay in touch. And I will keep you up to date with some upcoming webinars that we have planned and scheduled. And I look forward to meeting you, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.